Okay, this is Psalm 54, and I'm starting in verse 4. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is with those who uphold my life. He will repay my enemies for their evil. Cut them off in your truth. I will freely sacrifice to you. I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me out of trouble, and my eye has seen its desire upon my enemies. Well, Father, we do thank you that you protect us and you watch over us and you're with us at all times. And we ask now that you would help us to come into a better understanding of you, of your word, and that we would grow closer to you. And it's in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. All right, well, we started in chapter 30 of Genesis last time. And, Rachel and um, Leah are having all kinds of battles with each other, and kids are being born left and right, and handmaids are being dragged into it. And, we ended by saying, God seems to be teaching Jacob a number of lessons. He's teaching him lessons about deceitfulness. He's teaching him lessons about favoritism, about how things turn out when we insist on doing things, in his case, in his own way without the help of God. We're seeing lessons about immorality, lessons about the results of failing to take his role as a leader in the family, and ensuring that God's ways are those of his families. And so there was a lot going on. When we talked a little bit about how people are often so determined to have things their way that we do stupid things. We go to stupid extremes, and we're often willing to do things that are actually contrary to our own desires and our best interests just to have our ways. And in fact, when you think about the fact that we don't even, it's not just arguing with other people or other things or just stuff in the world. That when you think about what does God really want for us, then that becomes really an even more meaningful thing. This idea of that, we're fighting really against God a lot of times. And as we read through this chapter and even into the next one, I would say that one possibility that we're seeing here is God's allowing a deceitful Laban and maybe too stubborn and perhaps even controlling women into Jacob's life to teach something to Jacob about himself. And if you think about it, God does that to us a lot. He lets things into our lives to show us our own nature, to teach us things about ourselves. Now, we said how this is really starting to look like it's a sad story because it so clearly and intimately reveals the true nature of man. But it's a wonderful story at the same time in that it shows God's plan is going to be realized. Now, we see in hindsight that God does indeed bless Leah. She feels left out. She's the undesired or less desired or less wanted wife. But notice that she's the mother of 6 of the 12 tribes of Israel. And of those 6 tribes, she's the mother of the family of Levi, which is going to be the priests, and and Judah, which is going to be the family of kings. And so God, in a way, has really blessed her. Now, similarly for Rachel, he's going to allow something special into her life too. We'll talk about that, okay? Now, over time, we're going to find as we get into the following chapters that there's a jealousy, anger, and resentment amongst the brothers, that they don't all get along with each other, and that sometimes seems like the worst of it is actually between the brothers whose mothers are Leah and Rachel. In other words, that this competition, this jealousy, this animosity, whatever it is, it actually seems to come down from the mothers to the brothers too. Okay?
But Rachel never had her own baby, right? It was just through the servants.
No, she will.
Oh, okay.
We're going to talk about that pretty quick, okay? And if you stop and if you think about the level of dysfunction we're seeing in this team and in this family, and then we compare it to the level of dysfunction that was in Isaac's family. Well, as bad as Isaac's family was, it doesn't seem to compare to this. And as we said, there really wasn't comparatively even all that much in Abraham's family. It seems to be comparatively getting worse. Okay, from patriarch to patriarch. Okay, and I do think, while it's very seldom talked about, I think that that's an important thing to see. One of the last things we talked about is that notice that God God wants and is going to have 12 tribes of Israel. And back after the flood, we talked about 12 families that were coming out of the three sons of Noah. And we talked about how 12 symbolized the number for nations. And that's why we're going to have 12 tribes of Israel in comparison to the 12 families or groups that come out of the other portions of Noah's family, okay? And that what God is really doing is he's showing us in part that he's going to use these failed and flawed people in Jacob's family to create to 12 tribes of Israel. And we don't typically think sometimes about their origin and what they were like at the beginning, but to a large extent, that's what the rest of Genesis is about, is seeing them. Now, as bad as some of it's going to be, and including the remainder today and into parts of next week, what we're going to start to begin to see is a differentiation. Laban, remember what was Laban doing when we first read about him? How did he act and what? Well, so like I say, he we're going to see this transition and what was Laban like when we first saw him? When we
Running out because he was excited, thinking about
He thought there was going to be money.
the gold. Yeah, there was going to be gold, and remember he was nice to Abraham's servant, and he were happy to give Rebecca to him, and then when Jacob shows up, he runs out to meet Jacob, and of course then we read later that Jacob stays with him for a month, and he's helping out. He's doing some work there and around the place, and essentially. Laban says to him, "Hey, look, you can't stay here working basically with me for without getting paid. I got to pay you something." And then he starts cheating him, and we're going to continue to see Laban get worse and worse and worse, and we're going to see what that drives, how that drives changes in Jacob, and even in the daughters and Jacob's wives. So that's what's coming. So. Why don't we pick up in verse 20 real quick, okay? So, Maya, why don't you read 20 through 24 for us, okay?
Okay, then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebukim. Sometime later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son.
Okay. So, we just as kind of backup, Leah has this that 6th son, and she's still hoping that having given him all of these sons, that it's going to cause, Jacob to love her even more, or to at least love her the same. Now, Zebulun, the name of her last son, essentially means exalted. And so what Leah is really saying is, she's hoping that this son will lead Jacob to exalt her as the primary wife, okay, as his, most important wife, the one he lives with, the one he loves, and that kind of stuff. And so, that's where the dwell with me comes from and everything else. Now, notice how in verse 21, there's also this statement around afterwards she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. Now Dinah is mentioned here because she's going to become important in a couple of chapters, in chapter 34. Her role is kind of critical to what happens. And some people believe that there may have been other daughters, but because there were daughters, they just didn't mention them. Maybe, I really don't know. But notice that it does say afterwards she bore him a daughter. So, Dinah is the youngest of her kids, and not really sure if there were others or not. I tend to think not, but who knows. And then in verse 22, then God remembered Rachel and gave heed to her and opened her womb. Now, one of the first things that comes to mind when I read that is like, why now? Why does God open Rachel's womb now? And I'm going to tell you right up front, the Bible never really tells us, as far as I'm aware of. Okay, I can think of some obvious possibilities. The first is that God is merciful. And perhaps by keeping Rachel from having kids up until now, it was to grow her, and to develop her and help her learn to see God and stuff like that. And now God says, now it's time to be merciful. Keep in mind, God's plan, as I said a minute ago, includes having 12 tribes of Israel. And again, we see that God is being merciful in a sense by allowing Rachel to be a part of that, to be a mother. It's going to be of 2 of the tribes, as it turns out. I think maybe a better way to look at it is that God is controlling the timing. So God knows what's going to happen in the future. God knows Jacob is going to preferentially love the children of Rachel, just as he has preferentially loved Rachel. And perhaps by waiting to the end to open Rachel's womb, God's allowing and setting the stage for the story of Joseph, and how he's going to be able to send Joseph ahead to Egypt to prepare the way for the rest of the family. Okay. A lot of things are going on here. It could even just be because of Rachel's attitude towards her sister. Now, in verse 23, she says she bore a son, and he's taken away, God has taken away my reproach. Now, the word here for reproach, as my translation has it, also means rebuke or shame. And it's interesting that Rachel now acknowledges that God has given her this son. Okay, but she never approached God prior to this, that at least not that we see recorded, to have a son. To beseech or pray to God to give her a son. That she's never done that before. Okay, now the name that she gives this son is Joseph, which means Jehovah has added, God has added. Okay. When she says, here, so she named him Joseph, saying, may the Lord give me another son. It's almost a hint of what? She's not over this competition. It wasn't just about having a son. She still wants more sons, because she's still in competition. And you know, you get almost this little hint of she's grateful for the son, but she still wants more. You know, you know, it's easy to see this in other people, and maybe not so easy to see it in ourselves. You know, the other thing that's interesting about this is what did Rachel say to Jacob when Leah was having kids and she couldn't?
Give me a son or I'll die.
Give me a son or I'll die. She put it all on Jacob, and yet here she recognizes and acknowledges and gives credit to God. And I think that that's another example of human nature where we get so frustrated with stuff, we take things out on other people rather than going to God and acknowledging, hey, you're the one that's in charge, you know. And so, like I said, we see a lot of human nature in this family. Okay. Well, why don't we keep going on? Marie, will you read? Let's see, 25 through 27, please.
Okay. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my company." Or to my country, sorry. "Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." And Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake."
Okay. So, so now we start to have some new developments happening. So in verse 25, it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away." Now,
But why does he even have to ask that they're his wives and children?
well, I think in part it has to do with a different society and a level of respect to each other that we don't have anymore.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I wasn't sure.
Now there's other things, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But keep in mind, you know, Laban is her father, and what he wants to do is take his wives that are, you know, Laban's daughters and Laban's grandkids, his kids, and go away. So, and he's been working for Laban all of these years. Now, I kind of get the impression that as deceitful as Jacob has been at times and everything else, that he really wouldn't ask to leave unless the 14 years that he had promised to serve for essentially the two wives, really Rachel, were not up. So I think that what we have here is essentially a time marker. It says 14 years have gone by. That over these 14 years now, you know, Jacob has two wives, two concubines, 11 boys, and a daughter. That this has all happened in 14 years. So 12 kids in 14 years. Okay. So there's been a lot going on. And I think that this is probably right around the end of that time. Now, it's also possible that Joseph had decided, you know, maybe, or Jacob had decided, excuse me, maybe we should hang around so Laban can get to see, you know, grandsons a little bit more, maybe even grandsons from, you know, Rachel, you know, that type of thing, you know. But more than likely, I think it just, you know, we will say fortuitously, but probably through God's providence, that Joseph is born around the 14th year. Okay, and so Jacob has a right now to be able to say, look, I've done my service. You know, give me my wives and my kids for whom I've served you, and let me depart. In other words, he's basically saying, our agreement's over. It's time for me now to move on, to go back to home. Okay. And I think that's probably what's going on. And what's Laban's response?
He he wants him to stay because he says that he's been prosperous because God favors Jacob.
And yet, remember, a couple of chapters ago when Jacob was first going up to Padan Aram to look for a wife and to get away from Esau, that God said, hey, I'll bless you, but I'll bring you back. Okay? So, it could be that God is putting this desire into Jacob's heart to go home in order to prepare him to bring him back. Now, translations can be important. And in verse 27, my translation says, but Laban said to him, if now it pleases you, essentially, hint, hint, stay with me. That may be in italics in your translation. For I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account. Now I think your version of it, is I've discerned, I figured it out. That's being kind to Laban. Because in the Hebrew, the real word here is truly divine. And it's not this idea of excuse me, sorry. It's not this idea that Laban has figured this out. The word has to do with true divination. Okay?
Divination.
Yeah. And so, if you remember, divination is truly not insight from God. The word is nahas, and it means enchantment, black magic, to interpret by signs or omens. Okay, and there'll probably be a reference to this again in the next chapter. But Laban has been consulting with sorcerers or witchcraft, or he's diving into divination. Okay, and it's through that he's come to the realization that the reason he's being blessed is because Abraham's God is with Jacob. Now, again, going back to chapter 28, we see some things happening here. God had promised him, hey, Jacob, hey, I'll bring you back home. He promised him, hey, I'm going to make your descendants like the dust of the earth. I'll spread you all over the place. Families will be blessed because of you. Part of the promise that he had made to Abraham. And sure enough, we're seeing a hint of this, right? Laban is getting blessed because of Jacob. Okay, and God is blessing Jacob, and he's making him fruitful and stuff like this. Okay, and this is important to see because we see this in the world. This is an example of how non-believers are often blessed just by being associated with believers. Okay, now God's a God of mercy and love. Okay, and he knows today who the non-believers are, and he knows which ones of them will come to believe and which ones will not. But regardless of what will happen, he provides for them. So it's not as if God is going to just ignore, people who don't believe in him, or people who are not going to believe in him. But sometimes people who currently are not believing, regardless of where they're going to end up, are blessed by God because it just kind of pours over from God's blessing those who are already his. And sometimes the blessing comes because those who are already God's act and conduct themselves in a way where they bless others too. Now, this is a great kind of history of America, if you think about it. America has a strong Christian heritage, and yet America, as far as we can tell, was never a place where truly a majority of people were real believers. And yet America has been blessed by God because of the believers in America and because of the way believers have acted and treated. When believers have gotten into places of power in our government, think of the policies and the things that we've done, and think of the way things have worked, and think about You know, how many of the inventors and the scientists in our country's history were godly men and women, and how their inventions benefited everybody. And so we see that while we don't always recognize it at the time, that many blessings that God gives to his people end up also blessing others. So this idea that Laban has been blessed in part because of Jacob is not unusual. And it should lead us to ask a question. How many times does God bless people around us by blessing us and by working through us? And maybe we don't even realize it. See, God's process hasn't changed, right? And God uses his people to reach out to other people, okay? And this is an important principle in the Bible to see, and it's an important principle of life, okay? And one of the reasons that it's so important is this is evidence of God's commitment to the covenants and the promises that he's made to his people and to those who don't yet know him but will. And to demonstrate his goodness. You see, someday, even those people who never accepted God at the judgment seat, they'll never be able to say, but God, you didn't treat us fairly, or you treated us unfairly. Okay? And so we see this principle coming into play here. And like I say, it's important to see that God uses his people. Okay?
I had a question. So at this point, even though Jacob's been there at least 14 years, Laban doesn't know his God at all, really.
No, I don't think so.
He still has his little statues and his
I think that's right.
Little stuff and everything. So that part didn't rub off on him at all, or did it rub off on Leah and Rachel?
Well, let's save that for next time. Okay. We'll start to talk about that next time. Okay. I think there are times when Laban will manipulatively try to, this is a little too strong, talk a Christian-like talk, or act as if he knows the God of Jacob and Jacob's fathers. But I think it's just part of an act. You make up your own decision, okay? But I think that's what we're going to see as we go on. All right. So Laban says in verse 27, hey, look, if it pleases you, stay here with me because I think I prospered because of you. Maya, why don't you pick up and read 28 through 30 for us, okay?
Hang on. He added, name your wages and I will pay them. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? Did you want me to keep going?
No, that's good for now. So this is actually starting to sound a little bit like the first round of bargaining that happened between Laban and Jacob. Laban placed Jacob in a position where he says, hey, tell me what your wages will be. He wants to start the negotiation by putting it on to Jacob, because he figures, well, listen, if Jacob, names something that's pretty low, then I don't have to pay him fair, right? And we saw that with Rachel. Jacob says, hey, 7 years. Maybe Jacob would have said a year. Laban would have said a year. But when Jacob offers 7, he doesn't, there you go. So that's good enough. So Laban's kind of starting the same thing here, right? And, it's pretty clear that he believes that through divination, he can continue to get really wealthy if Jacob stays with him, right? And Laban is increasingly looking like, yeah, he really is greedy. That I was right when we first said, a couple of chapters ago, he ran out because of the gold, okay? Now, the problem is, Jacob's going to do a little bit better in the negotiations this time than last time, Now, I don't think both of them are gonna really maybe fully appreciate that at first, but he really is gonna do a little bit better. Now, notice how Jacob starts it. You know, Laban says, "Hey, you name your wages, and I'll give it." And so Jacob first starts by reminding him of everything that he's done. You know yourself how I have served you, and how your cattle have fared with me. What's he doing? He's setting the stage for the negotiation, right?
Yes.
He's basically saying,
Because, yeah.
yeah, he's basically saying I'm worth it, and he's agreeing with Laban. He's saying you're right, you're doing so well because of me, right? Now, Laban has become fairly wealthy, okay, because of him. Okay, and this word here for cattle can be translated as cattle. It also means herds, possessions, or substance. And I think it's probably best thought of in a slightly more general form. It doesn't mean just cattle. It means all of the herds, all of his substance. He's much better off now than beforehand. Okay, and also there's this aspect of Jacob saying, "Hey, look, I've served you fairly." Now maybe Jacob is making a slight back reference to, "And you cheated me about the daughters." Maybe. Okay, but there's this essence of, "Hey, and I've acted fairly towards you." Okay. And verse 30 goes on to say, "For you had little before I came, and it's increased to a multitude. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" Well, Jacob's basically saying is, I made you wealthy, but now how am I going to provide for 11 kids? Well, 12 kids, 11 boys and one daughter, and two wives and two handmaids, and all of this. You know, what's in this for me? You see, Jacob's starting to lay the grounds here. He's getting a little bit more used to dealing with Laban. Okay. Well, let's go on and read. And Marie, will you read 31 through 34, please?
So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the lambs, shall be considered stolen, if it is with me." And Laban said, "Oh, that it were according to your word."
Good. So Jacob makes an interesting deal here, or proposes it. Jacob says, what should his wages be?
No, don't pay me any money, but let me take all the spotted goats and sheep.
And notice how he starts this. I find this really interesting the more I think about it. He says, "Don't give me anything. I don't want anything. Let me go through your flock and take the speckled." What's he really saying?
I'll take the secondhand stuff.
I'll take the secondhand stuff. But he's also saying, "Hey, you know, you're not really giving it to me because I cared for them, and it's because of me that you have them in the first place."
So are the spotted and brown ones not as good as white ones?
Yeah, that's the inclination, and it probably has to do with the hides and the wool and what you can do with them, and that type of thing. Some people have talked about the fact, well, you know, that there were more of the solid colors than not. I don't know if that's really true, but there's this idea that they certainly are not the desirable ones. Okay.
Because the white ones can be dyed and colored.
Well, and they're solid white, right? and they're lighter in the summer. They're going to be a little bit whiter, that type of thing. And so he goes on to say, let me take what's in the flock. Notice this in 32. Don't miss this. Okay. Oh, by the way, let me back up to 31 for a second. I get really frustrated sometimes with too many pronouns. Like, we'll just use names. Like, who's who here, right? So let's make sure we get it straight. In 31, he said, what shall I give you? That's Laban talking. And then Jacob says, you shall not give me anything. If you'll do this one thing, I will again pasture and keep your flock. Oh, gee, it's kind of interesting. Jacob's changed his tune. Jacob had wanted to go home. It's time for me to leave. I got to go. And now Laban opens the door. Why is Jacob changing his mind?
Because he's got this deal going that he thinks he's going to benefit from.
Yeah, in all fairness, Jacob does need to provide for his family, but I think he sees an opportunity here too, right? And he says, so let me pass through, verse 32, let me pass through your entire flock today, removing the speckled, the spotted, the black among the lambs, blah, 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 blah. What does he want for wages? Well, he wants the speckled, the spotted, the mottled animals today as well as into the future. Okay? And that's what he's saying to Uncle Jacob. Now it's interesting that he mentions this particular price because last time what did Laban do?
Cheated him.
He tricked him, visually. Somehow late at night with a veil and of course unknowingly with God's help, Jacob can't see. But here, if Laban gets the solid colored animals and the speckled and the mottled and everything else are Jacob's, pretty clear. I think Jacob's making a deal like, hey, this time you can't fool me. Okay? I think Jacob has thought a little bit about this. He doesn't believe Laban's going to cheat him, that it's going to be really hard. Now Laban is going to show him that he's still a couple of steps ahead of him. Okay? But Jacob makes a deal where it seems like, hey, this is going to be hard to cheat. And in fact, what does he say? He say, my integrity is going to be proven by this, right? That if you find solid colored animals in my stuff, that consider it stolen. Well, that's a crime. I mean, that you steal a man's animals back there, you steal in his wealth. I mean, that's probably punishable by death. Okay, so Jacob's making a pretty hard deal here, and notice how readily Laban says, "Okay, deal done."
He wouldn't say that if it was a good
If he didn't think it was to his advantage, right? This is like going to Las Vegas and saying, "Yeah, I'll play this or that," knowing that Las Vegas odds are in their favor, right? Laban knows something's going on. Remember last time I said, I wonder if when Jacob made the deal for Rachel, Laban was already wondering how to cheat him. This is why I said that. Watch and see. Okay? So verse 34, Laban says, good, let it be according to your word. Verse 35, so he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them to the care of his sons. Now, who do you think just did that? This is my comment about pronouns. Who was...
Laban did it. Laban took...
Laban did it.
Yeah.
And what was the deal? Jacob said, let me go through today, and I'll take the spotted and speckled for my stuff, and from now on, all the spotted... What's Laban doing?
He's already messing with the deal.
He's messing with the deal. First, everything that's already spotted and speckled that was supposed to be Jacob's, he just stole. Now, the other thing is, his feeling is, hey, if these ones are speckled and spotted and I take them away and all that's left is the solid ones, how many speckled and spotted ones are going to start coming up and showing up? Fewer. Not only is he stealing, he's stacking the deck. So Laban hasn't really changed all that much. And it says, you know, he takes these animals and he gives them to the care of his sons. Okay, even at 14 years, you know, Jacob's kids are probably not old enough to fully be taking care of all of these animals. Okay, so it's Laban giving them to his sons. And then notice in verse 36, he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And there you have the end of it. And Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Stop it. So Laban comes in. Jacob's made a deal where he thinks, you know, he can't be cheated anymore. Laban cheats him right away. Okay, stacks the odds against him. Okay. So, you know, this explains why Laban doesn't even feel like he needs to negotiate. Yeah, sure, sounds like a great deal. I'll just cheat. And now the deal is on my side, okay?
But doesn't Jacob realize he cheated? Oh yeah, because I know what he does now.
Yeah, he does. Yes, he does. Yep, he does. So, verse 37, then Jacob took fresh rods, a poplar, and almond plane trees, and peeled white stripes into them, exposing the white which was in the rods. In other words, he takes these tree branches and he starts to peel the bark off in certain ways to expose stripes and stuff like that. Okay, and so he does this, and when it says then, you get this impression Jacob is doing this as a result of what Laban has done. And what kind of animals is Jacob starting with? Now these are still Laban's animals. What kinds are they?
Goats and sheep, right?
Yeah, but they're all solid. Okay, so Jacob is going to try to say, well, what do I do about this? So as a result of Laban, he takes these.
Wait a minute. Jacob was supposed to get the spotted ones, but Laban cheated him and took them.
Right.
So now Jacob has the solid ones.
Right. So he cuts these trees, and he peels off portions of the bark so they look striped and spotted and stuff like that. He's taking off parts of the bark. Verse 38, and he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks. My translation says gutters, in the watering troughs. That's essentially what the gutters is. It's the best translation of them. Okay, where the flocks came to drink, and they mated when they came to drink. Verse 39. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted.
That's what I don't understand. How did these sticks make them have spots?
Okay, hang on. Verse 40, Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face towards the striped and all the black and the flock of Laban, and he put his herds apart, and he did not put them with Laban's flock. All right, well, let's stop there for a second. Okay. So here's Jacob, and he comes up with this elaborate ritual. And remember, Laban has told his sons, move the flocks 3 days away from Jacob. So there's no way, one, he can get these spotted and mottled and speckled animals back that are really his. And two, that there's no way that they're going to breed. Okay, Laban thinks this is a deal, right? And Jacob goes through this ritual. Now, most people believe that probably what it was this idea, this superstition, that the animals, whatever they were looking at when they were breeding, they would reproduce. So if they're looking at spotted animals, they're going to reproduce spotted animals. Okay, But it obviously there's no truth to this, right?
Right. It's
Right.
got to be God's work.
So he goes through this elaborate ritual, okay, and you know, um, many people, many commentators, many scholars have spent a lot of time explaining how this worked or didn't work or anything else. And you know what? I mean, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe I'm completely wrong. But I think there's a far simpler explanation. And the explanation is simply that God promised Jacob he would take care of him. Okay, it's back in chapter 28, verse 15. God promised to be with Jacob and to keep him wherever he went. And even Laban has acknowledged God is the one who's making you prosper. Okay? Now, if God wants Laban and Laban's family to come to know him, if God wants to be known through the patriarchs like we've talked about, even if Jacob does kind of a dumb, stupid ritual thing, God is going to bless it. Okay, now we're going to see next week when we get there in chapter 31 that that's indeed the deal. Okay, but right now we don't see it. Okay, now having said that, I'm convinced Jacob is not trusting in God. After all, he's got to cut down these trees, he's got to peel these bark. Every time the sheep come down to drink water and he thinks it's in mating season, he's got to bring these poles out, he's got to set them up, he's got to make sure the animals are looking at him, he's got to put pens together, he's got to do, I mean, this is a lot of work. If Jacob was fully trusting in God, he wouldn't have to do any of this. Okay? Now this is really interesting because, as I said, God is once again caring for Jacob, even though Jacob doesn't have a lot of faith. And it should be assuring to us to know that God takes care of us because it's his character. That's his nature. He doesn't do it because of us, because of our great faith, or because we've acted properly, or that we've demonstrated great love to him. That we should feel comfortable in knowing that God's nature is such that he will take care of us even when we're not fully faithful to him. It's not an excuse to not be faithful, but it's an understanding of God's nature. And we see this right here. God is showing his nature. Okay, I'm going to take care of Jacob, even though Jacob is still trying to do it on his own. And he doesn't understand that it all comes from God. God's also demonstrating to Jacob, if you think about it, that he is indeed with him, that he's still with him. Okay, and Jacob, again, by the next chapter, is going to start to finally really kind of figure this out. Okay, remember, God, again, like we said, God promised to bless him and to bless all of the others. And God has promised us the same thing, that he will bless those who trust in Jesus, even if we don't always remember that God's in charge. God also said that he would be sure to make sure that Jacob returned to the promised land. Now, God knows Jacob is going to need at least some degree of wealth, one, to make the trip, and two, when he gets back there, to support this family. In addition, he's speaking to all the Canaanites in that area, remember, through the patriarchs, and he's letting them see that it is indeed God, the God of Abraham, that's blessing them, not some little idol or not something like that. So he's truly, when you think about it, God is preparing Jacob now. He's started to put in Jacob's heart a desire to go home, okay? And he's starting to prepare him. God wasn't surprised that even though he started to put this desire into Jacob, that Jacob decided to stay and work and get rich. God's using it for his purposes, okay? Jacob's in charge of Laban's animals. The spotted and the speckled, the striped are born into Laban's flocks will become Jacob's. Okay, and what seemed like a foolish deal at first is going to end up benefiting Jacob because God again is demonstrating his sovereignty. Okay?
But I don't get it. When Laban takes all the spotted ones, okay, which were supposed to be for Jacob,
Mhm.
does he not think that Jacob isn't going to say, "What the hell are you doing"?
But Jacob doesn't, does he?
No.
Why?
He's like
Why?
a meek and mild, like, okay, well, you just took advantage of me.
Why?
Because he knows God's going to take care of it.
No, I don't think
Yeah.
so. But what else might be the reason? Well, Jacob,
Because he was already
I don't think he
scheming how to
knows,
get
right?
the better of him.
Laban's got the wealth. He's got sons.
Mm,
Okay, adult sons. Jacob doesn't.
he did it behind his back.
Laban's got all of the friends and family around there, right? Okay, and on top of that, what happened when Jacob went to Laban about the cheating with the wife?
You got
He ended up working 14 more years. I mean, 7 more years. Right? He knows it's not going to work out.
Okay.
Notice, we're reminded of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 29. For consider your calling, brethren, that there are not many who are wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And the base things of the world and the despised God has chosen, things that are not, so that he may nullify the things that are, so that no man may boast before God. You see, that's what we're going to see happening. That's the beginning of it. Okay? Notice also, picking back up in verse 40 or verse 39. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. So the idea is there's a lot more speckled and spotted than there are solid. Verse 40, Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban, and he put his own herds apart, and he did not put them with Laban's flocks. Okay, verse 41, moreover, whenever the stronger the flock were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the side of the flock in the gutters in the watering troughs so that they might mate by the rods. But when, 42, the flocks were feeble, he put them in so that the feebler were Laban's, and he did not put them in, so that the feebler ones were Laban's and the strongers were Jacob. Notice the last verse. So the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. He's becoming so prosperous, he's starting to trade on his own. And he's getting servants and everything else. When the animals of either herd, Laban's solid colored ones or Jacob's, are bred, Jacob makes an attempt to make sure that the strongest animals are breeding again with these striped poplar poles and everything else. And he thinks he's inducing more speckled animals through his efforts. And of course, the stronger animals and stuff like that. We actually begin to see Jacob is getting the upper hand. Okay? But it's God who's made it happen, not Jacob. And the result is Jacob becomes exceedingly prosperous. Just like who?
Abraham.
Abraham and Isaac. Maybe even more like Abraham. Okay? We're gonna be reminded later on, that reminds us now, that when Jacob arrived in Padan Aram, he had only a staff. He had nothing. Think of all that has changed. And in all fairness, what is God doing a little bit here?
Was it getting him ready to leave?
Getting him ready to leave, but there's a little bit of justice. Remember, we've seen justice periodically flowing in through this chapter. There's
Yeah, he's taking a wrong and making it right.
a little bit, isn't he? Not only that, what should Laban be thinking? Well, I cheated this guy that God is blessing. Maybe his herds are growing and he's becoming exceedingly prosperous, and I'm only doing so because of his God.
You think that he'd get the hint that his God is a good God, or something?
That's right.
He had to think about.
That's right.
Following.
That's exactly right. This is how God uses his people to talk to make himself known to others. It's one of the ways. Now there's three last points. Okay? When God promises something, like to take care of us, nothing will stand in the way or will stop him.
God keeps his promises.
That's right. Nothing can stop him. Not the fact that our faith is less than it should be, that it's not perfect, okay? Or the fact that people like Laban are trying to cheat us or take advantage of us or harm us. Nothing. God's sovereignty triumphs over all. God said to Jacob before he even got up there, I will take care of you. Now we can honestly see that he wasn't just telling Jacob that because of the arduous trip and the potential for trouble and everything else and the safety issues and stuff like that. He was telling him something that Jacob could look back on and remember when things were going badly, when he was being cheated. God was preparing him even then for what was going to happen. And my contention is God does the same for us. He prepares us so that when things get hard, we can look back and say, oh yeah, God promised me it would be okay. God's sovereignty is going to triumph over everything, including over Satan. Okay? Laban is just a representative of Satan here. Look at what he's doing to God's people. Okay? Think of the foreshadowing that's happening. Egypt's Pharaoh is going to try desperately to keep the Israelites in slavery. Even to the point where he's not going to give in, plague after plague. But in the end, he can't stop God. And Moses is going to lead his people to freedom. And in the end, Jacob is going to leave with all of his prosperity. Everything. Oh yeah, that's right. The Israelites took all the riches of Egypt when they left. The foreshadowing is very interesting. Okay? Notice the fact that Jacob also has had a difficult time, without a doubt. I mean, he has had a hard time. That's also part of the message. Okay? Jacob wanted to do things his way and has not given in to God. And so pretty much every step of the way, he's struggled. It's been hard for him. And the only reason he's being prosperous now is because God is preparing him to leave. God says, yeah, you do need to be wealthy, and I'm going to take it from the person who's taking advantage of you. Okay, it's because it's God's plan now, not because Jacob's doing something that's finally working. Okay? There's a point here. God prospered Jacob despite Jacob. But I wonder how it would have turned out if right from the start Jacob had given in to God. Instead of resorting to do things on his own and approach things in terms of, God, I'm your servant. You promised to care for me. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what to do. Remember, I said that right up front when Laban cheated him with Rachel. I said, what would have happened if Jacob had said and gone to God and said, what do I do about this? I love her and I work for her and he's given me the other daughter. Well, what would have happened? How would this, there's a message here for us too. That God may bless us in spite of ourselves, but how much better would it be if we just submitted to God's sovereignty right from the start? Okay, there's a lot here to think about. And as I say, we're going to start seeing, as we move into next chapter, this transition where we see fully and more completely just how evil Laban really is, and the impact that that has on Jacob and on maybe his wives. And when I said earlier on that maybe at the beginning, maybe God has let Laban into Jacob's life to show Jacob who he really is and the differences between God's way and Jacob's ways. Maybe what we're going to see next time is that it actually works, or at least it's starting to work. Okay?
And God tells us you can do it my way or you can do it the hard way. But
Take your pick. How do you want to do it? Right? So this isn't just a story, it's a message about how to live God's way. Right? Okay, anything else?
If it's a good story.
Anybody want to pray? Well, Father, we do thank you. One, we love hearing about what you've done and how you've prospered and how you've worked to get your name out and to teach us right from wrong. And in this part of history, how you've used the patriarchs to do that. And we're grateful, Father, that you used a man like Jacob, a very stubborn man, a very resourceful man, who insisted on doing things his way, but you continued to work in his life and using providentially all the things around him to show him there's a better way, and that's your way. Father, we ask that we would take the message that we see here today that comes out of Jacob's life, and that we would, through your help, by your Spirit, by your mercy and grace, apply it to our lives and learn how to truly submit to you and trust in you and let you have your ways, that we might be useful to you as servants, and you can make yourself known to all of those around us through us. And we pray all these things in Jesus' blessed name. Amen.